So now he brings up this issue, which is not one of idolatry at all. Not even mentioned it. He brings up the issue of the burdens that Solomon had placed upon him. Okay? And presumably Jeroboam is representing these northern tribes. Those are the ones that are farther away from Jerusalem than the southern tribes. Jerusalem is in the tribe of Judah. Okay?
He answered them, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me, so people will know."
So that was apparently a wise thing to do. Rehoboam said, let's have a
Take a deal.
sure, cooling off period. It would also give him an opportunity to counsel with his advisors, as to what to do.
King Rehoboam took counsel with the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. He said, "What answer do you guys want to give these people?" They told him to him. "You will be observed to those people today and serve them. If you respond to them with kind words, they will be your servants always."
So their advice was to, be moderate and to try to reach some sort of agreement and to respond to them in an understanding and tolerant manner.
Okay, ignore the advice the elders gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. "What?" he asked. He advised that we reply to the people who said to me, "Let me live for the Father placed upon us." And the young men who had grown up with him answered, "Speak thus to the people who said to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us.' Say to them, 'My Lord's window is thicker than my father's garment. My father imposed heavy yoke on me, and I will add to your yoke. My father flogged you with whips, so I will flog you with scorpions.'"
That's hard to understand or imagine how anybody could find that to be an effective way to govern. But what do you think why do you think the words are so, so harsh, so articulate? It may just be that this is being retold from the point of view disapproval of this type of advice, and so they're sort of calling it out, so showing how counterproductive it would be. But
He points out the difference between elders who maybe have gained some wisdom and the know-it-alls.
right, but this may also be sort of typological kinds of ways of telling a story. In other words, associating the moderate, sensible evidence, sensible strategy with the older ones, and associating the nonsensical strategy with the younger ones, just because of again, common pattern. Okay.
Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had told them, come back on the 3rd day. The king answered the people harshly, ignoring the advice the elders had given him. He spoke to them in accordance with the advice of the young men and said, "My father gave you a yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father flogged you with whips, but I flog you with scorpions." The king did not listen to the people, for the Lord had brought him about in order to fulfill the promise that the Lord had made to Jeroboam, son of Nebat. And all Israel
Ahijah or Ahiah was the prophet that had identified Jeroboam as the person who would rest the kingdom for himself. I have to look more clearly as to why they are.
When all Israel saw that the king could not listen to them, the people answered the king, "We have no portion in David, no share in Jesse's son. We have
So this is almost like a kind of a slogan, you can imagine, where they are basically openly rejecting the dynasty of David, largely because of the way Solomon had governed and his promises to govern in the future.
So the Israelites returned to their homes, but Rehoboam continued to reign over the Israelites who lived in the town of Judah.
Tribe.
Mine
Says
says
10?
10.
Okay, all right. So it says 10. Yes, it says this, actually it says the cities of Judah in the Hebrew, so I don't know why it translated it in the singular. The cities of Judah, which will be towns of Judah. Okay. So this is the split. And what we should be aware of is that the book of Malachim essentially offers two different reasons for this. One is, shall we say, the more spiritual reason, and that is because of the idolatry. This was God's punishment of Solomon. And you can decide for yourself, by the way, in terms of the composition of the book, which you think is more of a primary reason, which you think is more of a secondary reason, or perhaps equal between the two. I mean, you can decide it as you go through the book and reflect back on it. And then the other reason is the political reason, because of the rejection of the northern tribes being levied, taxed, and for a purpose that was so remote from them, because this was largely for the royal house and for the temple, which were located in the tribe of Judah, far away from many of the northern tribes.
So the wood if you want to help build the country.
Well, I don't know why you need to use the word would. I mean, if what do you think? I mean, it's like, right, is there anything here where are we given any?
If I were the boss, I would tell them how to work.
Right, but he doesn't say that.
He's not sensitive.
That's the, you
Why
know.
does this only involve the northern tribe? What about the other tribes? Is it the story just about, what about everybody else?
Okay, well, it's a fair question. There's no perfect answer to that. But let me propose one possible answer. These events are a reflection of actual historical events. I can't necessarily say that, shall we say, coming from the same perspective about the events in the Torah, 5 books of Moses. And maybe not even about the book of Joshua. But I can say that, coming from a scientific perspective, that there is reasonable corroboration that there was a split in the kingdom. And so this is one effort, or actually certainly two efforts, combined into one, to try to explain why that happened. Okay? Beyond that, there's no clear answer to the question that you're asking. I hope that maybe next week when we study the history of the kings of Judah, we'll get a little bit more of a view. But let me just say this. Number one, there is certainly strength and credit to the fact that we have a dynasty through King David's descendants that was viewed as the the spine of the country. It was stability. And David was from the tribe of Judah. So we see this all the time. People have a preference for their own. So the people in the South felt a connection to Judah because that's what they were. They were Judahites. And so they felt a connection to David and his descendants. The people in the North were from different tribes. They didn't have that same connection. So that's one possibility. He was, which tribe was he from? I'm not sure. I don't remember the tribe. One of the and usually, if there is an answer, it would have been given here, somewhere in those verses, in either chapter 4 or 5. I'm sorry. I have to look back, actually. Not sure about this chapter. Now.
So was there a war of historically documented between the northern tribes and the two southern tribes?
There were probably skirmishes between the two tribes. They're described in the Book of Kings. I don't know of any archaeological documentation of a particular war between them, but it's reasonable to assume that there were those skirmishes as described because there seems to be a history of skirmishes among all of the tribes, both the Hebrew tribes and the non-Hebrew tribes throughout the whole area.
Does the Book of Kings reference the war that was between the north and the south, without my understanding is saved the south when was it the Assyrians came, when the ten tribes were lost, but the two.
I don't know about a wall. Where did you hear that? Where did you?
Well, I had actually heard about it, I think in Abba Edom's civilization of the Jews, and then one time in Israel in Jerusalem, walking around on the floor.
Like a cargo.
Yeah, with the water, they had excavated and had a little plaque to say this was the wall, this was a Roman wall that protected when the Assyrians assault, and the ten tribes disappeared and were protected, so there was some.
That wall might have protected part of Jerusalem, but I don't know of a wall that is quite understood that you said many of it. I don't know about a wall that went the entire across the country. I mean, but if you can identify more about that, you have Abba Edom's book. Yeah, I'd like to see that. The advice of the younger people is what Rehoboam followed, and he rejected the advice of the elders. And the book tells us that this was all intended by God. In other words, what you kind of have here almost is a sort of like, as if God intended to punish Rehoboam and to limit what he could rule over because he was the son of somebody who brought idolatry through his foreign wives. And all of these other historical events, which seem in many ways to be very believable, in the sense that they could have happened in terms of, the history of the levies and the taxation and the rebellion of the northern tribes against this. All of this now is explained as being set up by God as a way of motivating the people to help carry out God's plan to separate the kingdoms. Okay? So, depending on your religious perspective, you can take that as the literal truth, or you can take that as a kind of tendency, as a kind of almost bias or preference of the writer of the Book of Kings in order to justify these events, to say these were not just accidental, these were not just one man's decision to take bad advice, that this was all part of God's plan. Or you can find some kind of moderate position between them. I look at the 6-Day War as a reflection of God's intention, but how literal I'm going to be about that, is another matter. So I take a more moderate view. But there are a lot of different ways of understanding. Now, we are, when we follow through in chapter 12, you'll find that the claim that all of these events were to remove from Rehoboam, the successor of Solomon, the ability to perpetuate the idolatry that was going on in the south, we'll find a little bit of a problem because, in fact, Jeroboam in the north sets up idols. And he, as you might expect, has to build shrines in order to provide some place for his people to go, because they certainly he didn't want to encourage them to go to Jerusalem. Now, there's no indication that they couldn't have gone to Jerusalem. Perhaps many of them did. But he set up shrines through two main places. Now, he was ruling a much bigger territory, at least on paper, than Rehoboam was in Judah. So he set up two shrines. One was at Bethel, which was a traditional place of worship, and the other one was at Dan, which was apparently in the north. and we're told that he puts golden calves at each of these shrines. You know, and I'm not going to get into it now because we can't. We just don't have the time. But I mean, the connection between that and the story of the people worshiping the golden calf in the Torah has, prompted many scholars or revisionists to try to see the story in the Torah as a kind of, setup to denigrate, to some extent, Aaron and the Levites. And it's a whole interesting set of possibilities there. But in any event, the book of Kings is clear that he set up the golden calves. So those were some sort of worship alternative. And we're also told in chapter 12, he set up alternative priests, because he couldn't use the same priesthood that was used in the south. And, very interestingly, that he established a new holiday. And it's not called Sukkot, but it occurred 1 month later than Sukkot. Sukkot occurs on the 15th of the 15th day, begins on the 15th day of the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei, the way we name the months. And we're told that he set up a holiday that started on the 15th day of the 8th month. And the book of Kings is clear that was an alternative to the existing holiday. And this is so typical of the way religions and national religions compete with each other. He didn't want them to be observing this holiday on the same day that the people in the South were observing it, whether it's because there would be too much competition, that people would be drawn to the South and wouldn't come to his, or whether it's because he didn't want to acknowledge sanctity of that day, so he did it on another 15th of the month. And the 15th of the Hebrew month is the full moon, so apparently there was significance in having it on the beginning and on the full moon. But also, that holiday, which we now observe as Sukkot, was in biblical times apparently a time of coronating the king. So the Bible says that he began his kingship on that day.
Civil leader, but he also was religious leader.
This is very important because we find that in the Bible there is a close, if not intimate, necessarily intimate connection between the state, if you will, and the religion. And this is the nature of today we would call it a tribal religion. The prophets that begin to appear, especially in the book of Samuel and in the book of Kings, these prophets begin to sort of separate some aspects of the religion from the state, basically because they're criticizing the way the state is behaving, in some cases the way the state is conducting the religion. So they're sort of they're interceding between those two elements. But generally speaking, the kings want there to be an identity between them, unless of course the priests are doing something. And the kings are doing something. The priests don't like it. The priests are doing something. The kings don't like it. Now, there you have a couple of items that are very important, and I want to just refer to them now. First of all, you have this table of kings and prophets, and there are two of them. It's part one that we're interested in today. Part two will be next week. But if you take a look at that table of kings and prophets, you'll see that we have here a very useful list of the kings of Israel. Okay, so just look at the column that says Kings of Israel, North. Do you have any extras of those if people don't have them? Well, while you're doing that, at least, let me tell you the other thing. I want to make sure that everybody has the summary of all the kings of Yehuda and Israel, where we're given a one-paragraph summary for each king, and each king accomplished. Didn't accomplish. Okay, so that's it.
Summary of Kings of Yehuda and then
Where are,
Okay,
Six pages.
that's part two, that's for next week. So you need part one for this week.
Right,
oh, this is the,
that's a, yeah, that's a,
That's it.
part two. Kings and Malachim, this is part
Oh, no,
one.
that's still
is
part-
this
that's the
part
same
one?
page you have.
You want part one?
Part one, you have it, that's part one.
Anybody else need it, does anyone have it? This is the summary.
Do you have the summary, Mark, you might as well check out, see whether you
I
have the
have
summary.
the summary.
Since she
There were
has
an
it.
awful lot.
Okay, so you need the summary. So at least we need some of those summaries. And, well, I'm sure that you will all get it, so let me just say this.
Here, I can get right upstairs.
Okay, thank you. I can say this. On the table of kings and prophets, under kings of Israel, there's one thing here that's very valuable, is they show you the end and the beginning of each dynasty, because throughout the kings of Israel, you have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different dynasties, you know? So in other words, you'll have, the most that you, I think, have is 4 successive sons succeeding one particular king, and then the last son is assassinated by a usurper, who then starts a new dynasty. His dynasty might last for 1 generation, and he may have a son who reigned for 7 days. I mean, that's the way it went in the north. And it's just a constant history of kings being assassinated and then replaced by their assassinators, or their assassins. So you will see on this list here, you look at the dotted lines separate each of these dynasties. So you get an idea from this how that went. That's number one. Now, on the summary of all the kings of Yehuda and Israel, this, what we're dealing with here begins at the bottom of the first page, page 1. It says the kings of Israel. Okay? And then we're given these little thumbnail sketches of each of these 19 kings. The last one being Hoshea. Okay? Not to be confused with the prophet of the same name, Hoshea. This is King Hoshea.
Some were 6 months and some were 20 years.
That's right. So you get an idea of the instability, inconsistency, and the violence throughout all of those ruler systems. Well, I think the answer basically is yes, but we're not dealing so much today, if at all, with the kingdom of Judea. Today we're just dealing with the kingdom of Israel, okay? And on that, I would say certainly yes. And the violence is very explicit in the Book of Kings. It's very explicitly described. Okay? So, is it correlated to the idolatry? I would say that it's virtually impossible to know whether that's the case or not. You can look at it that way, you can judge it that way, but first of all, to support your point, we're told from time to time throughout the book, see, when you read some of these passages, even if you don't intend to read the entire book, just almost doesn't make any difference where you look in the book. You'll see some judgment made by the narrator about the evil of this particular king and what he did and the idols that he brought in. and how he worshipped an idol, usually called Molech, who required them to sacrifice their children through fire, sacrifice their children, human children, through fire. Is that the truth? Is that an exaggeration? Were they doing enough other bad things to justify that as a hyperbole? I don't know. But at the same time, in the South, where you didn't have one king usually assassinating another king, although you had some assassinations, you had many kings that are denigrated by the narrator for having brought idols into the country, even in the South, in Judah. So there's enough bad practice to go around and to support, your judgment. I would prefer to look at these books as kind of just sort of artifacts of some evidence of what might have been going on before I draw any conclusions about connecting, the events and the acts with, with what their professed religious practices were. I mean, even today, you have people who profess and I'm using the word orthodox here, not with a capital O, but with a lowercase o, who profess orthodoxy in their Jewish religious practices, who are in high positions of power, and who are, arguably, some of them are arguably guilty of corrupt practices. So I mean, it's. I think personally, this is my personal. I think it's simplistic to make a lot of these connections. It's one of the mysteries of human life, and it's a sad and disturbing mystery of human life. And I think it's just really useful to note the so-called facts that are presented in the books, and to also note the narrator's view. And the narrator is very generous about giving his view. Those are the things that I think that's the most that we could realistically bring out of our study of the books. Now, I want you to also receive another map, which we're going to use now just to review some tendencies and some patterns, because to some extent that's the best way for us to deal with this book, these two books that it is, which are very, very full of events. But this is a map of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, just at the time that we have been talking about, and you can see where Israel is with respect to where Judah is, and you'll see some of the neighboring countries as well. I mean, they're important. And then I'd like you to look at some of the notes that are in these boxes in red type. Okay? So starting with right at the top on the left is a little bit blurry, so I can't read it too well. But we'll get back up to that. It's about Elijah. On the left, the introduction of Phoenician cults following the marriage of Ahab with Jezebel caused violent reactions in Israel that eventually wiped out the house of Omri. Okay, we haven't gotten to those kings yet. We will in just a moment. But basically, you're getting an idea of some of the tensions that existed. Then below that, Samaria, the fortress capital of Israel, was built by Omri. Okay, so today that whole area is called Shomron or Samaria, but it actually goes back to the city, Samaria, or Shomron. Down at the bottom left, Shishak, Egyptian pharaoh, raided the divided kingdoms, plundering Jerusalem in approximately 925 BCE. Okay, that comes next week. Let's see. on the right, the lower right, Moab was ruled as a vassal kingdom during the Omri dynasty. The Dibon stele commemorates the victory of Mesha, king of Moab, over Israel and the return of Moabite independence. I made reference to that last time. You find that in your material. It is just to make sure that you have it. It's very interesting, and you can read it. Read the page. Here it is. It looks like this. And what's significant about this, just to reiterate, is that this is one of the extra-biblical evidences, archaeological evidences, that corroborates at least the name of one of the kings of Israel, Omri, and also the fact that there was war between Omri and Moab. Generally speaking, the problem with these steles is that they only usually brag about their victories over foreign kingdoms. So in other words, if this comes from Moab, they're going to talk about their victory, as they see it at least, over Israel, but they won't talk about Israel's victory over them. So you just have to understand it. The fact that they don't doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we don't see them publicizing their failures. But the existence of this type of evidence, by the way, this stele of this Mesha stele, I'm trying to remember here where you can find it. It's in the Louvre in Paris. But actually, it's not the real stele. What happened was that the real stele is documented as having been discovered, and then it got destroyed before it got out of the Middle East. It was destroyed by some Arab people. And but the fragments were then reassembled in such a way now that, and then they made a kind of plaster cast of it. So I think that's what you see in the Louvre. Where the actual fragments are, I'm not sure.
What is this?
Well, it's some sort of metal or stone billboard, you might say, that declares the achievements of a particular powerful ruler. And they were probably displayed in some public place. Then eventually, when that kingdom was destroyed and the city in which it was set up was destroyed, they get buried underground. And archaeologists come along centuries later and discover it. So, because, in terms of books don't survive very well, underground. But stone inscriptions can survive. So that's the evidence that we have.
What about the Amara?
And how does it relate to this time, this period? Well, there are lots of other such objects, but I was only citing the ones that relate specifically to this period. We talked a little bit about this last week also. So what we see from some of the notes on this map is some of these conflicts. If you look on the upper right corner, upper right, not the corner, but the upper right, one box down from the down on the top. Aram waged almost constant war against Israel. The Syrians were held in check by Ahab until his death in battle at Ramoth Gilead. I can't read the one that's on the right top. But on the left top, there's something there about the prophet Elijah. We will talk about in a minute. But basically, what you have here is an ongoing record of skirmishes, not just between Judah and Israel, but more often between Aram, which is Syria, and the northern kingdom, and also between Moab and the northern kingdom. So, we have, a number of references on this map to Ahab. Now, if you look on your list of kings, table of kings and prophets, you'll see, one of the dynasties, was founded by Omri. Omri is the one who's mentioned on the stele, by Mesha, king of Moab. And Omri's son was Ahab, who in English is called Ahab. Now, Ahab is probably remembered best in Jewish tradition for two reasons, which are related. One is his wife was quite influential. She was from the north. She was from Tyre, and her name was Isabel, which might be a made-up name, because it's not a very nice name in Hebrew. But in English it's called Jezebel, and she's remembered for importing the worship of the Tyrian god Baal into Israel, and being quite assertive about it. Now, the counterforce was a prophet named Eliyahu, or Elijah, and he was in constant conflict with Ahab's house. But if you read the accounts of Ahab, we don't have time to get into it in detail. If you read the accounts of Ahab, in many ways Ahab was one of the most successful and stable kings, and was able to keep some of the surrounding countries at bay. But Eliyahu was arrayed against him because of Jezebel, and because of at least that's the way the accounts represent it. We have Ahab's expression of ire towards Eliyahu, but we also sometimes have him cooperating with Eliyahu. So this is the locus of this famous prophet. One of the things that Eliyahu says at the beginning of his career is, "Dew and rain are in my control." So he sends a message to Ahab, and he says to him, there's not going to be any rain on this land if I don't want it. He takes a very powerful position, represented in the Bible as speaking for God, having the power, that's granted from God. But basically being prepared to withhold it if Ahab doesn't amend his royal approach. The stories about Elijah are replete with all kinds of miracles. He's a homeless kind of person. He doesn't have any set home. Travels around. He's taken in by a widow in the town of Zarephath, who gives him shelter. He in return saves her from starvation and saves her son from a fatal illness. And he has a successor, the prophet Elisha, Elijah, Elisha, two different people, who also has similar stories attached to him as well. The biggest opposition to Eliyahu, Elijah, really came not so much from Ahab, but from Jezebel. She had a lot of power, and this is also important, even if we didn't have the issue of Eliyahu, because you have now from a marital point of view, they seem to get along very well. This is like, it's like Ceausescu in Romania and his wife, very close. They ruled together, and they were basically killed together by the people. But here you have two people who ruled together, and Jezebel was a foreigner. She was a follower of a different religion, and she pervaded that religion in Israel. So this is in and of itself reflection of what was going on in the north. But in some ways, somewhat similar to what happened with Solomon, but you never have a situation admitted in the Bible where one of Solomon's wives had as preeminent a role as Jezebel had with respect to Ahab's reign. one of the most famous events in the history of Elijah and his opposition to the Baal was where he confronts the prophets of Baal in chapter 18 at First Kings, chapter 18, at Mount Carmel, which is basically the city of Haifa is built along Mount Carmel, and that description is in one of the Haftorahs of the year, in which he challenges the prophets of Baal into a kind of supernatural test. Another very famous aspect of Elijah, which is in this book, everything about Elijah is in this book, is in chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. It's worth reading just because the words are so famous, but they're also enigmatic. 19, verses 11 and 12. The word of God says to him, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And then we're told the Lord was passing. Now, when we're told that, that's not something, we don't have that often an actual sort of almost visual connection between a prophet and God. There are only a couple of places in the Bible where we have that. But this appears to be something like that. So it kind of is on the level of sort of the revelation at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20, the time that Isaiah, which we'll get to next year, God willing, sees a palace with God and his followers in it, or where Ezekiel has a vision that appears to be some sort of vision of God. But here we have a kind of a very sophisticated sort of vision of God. God was passing, and a great and powerful wind, smashing mountains and breaking rocks, went before the Lord. And then it says, the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind came an earthquake. And we're told, the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire. And we're told, the Lord is not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. You ever heard that expression in English, a still small voice? Odmama.com. So, whatever that is, I mean, I'm not, going to say what it is, but it's a rather sophisticated expression of a manifestation of God. This set in the middle of all of these stories of violence and power plays, and a noble opposition by the prophet. Ahab is also very well known, Ahab and Jezebel, for the way in which he tried to deprive one of his subjects of his property, because the subject's name was Naboth, and this man owned a vineyard that abutted Ahab's property, and Ahab wanted to buy the vineyard, and Naboth wouldn't sell it to him. And Jezebel said to him, why are you so upset? He says, no problem, just have him killed, and then, his property was cheap to you. So that's what he did. So again, again, I have to say, you have to be careful here. Clearly, the Book of Kings has its view of things and how it represents facts. I'm not saying that it didn't happen this way, but you have to be, a little bit, open-minded about how it might have happened. But in any event, it's just what's fine. But that's what it's about. Elijah actually survives Ahab. Ahab's death is covered in chapter 22, and he goes on to prophesy against Ahab's son. And finally, Elijah's life on earth ends in 2 Kings, in chapter 2 of 2 Kings. And by the way, although for the most part the division between 1 Kings and 2 Kings is kind of arbitrary, for the most part you might say, if you're looking for information about the kingdom of Israel through the reign of Ahab, you'll find it in 1 Kings. Beginning with most of things that happen after Ahab, you'll find it in 2 Kings. So that's kind of where the division is.
But at the end of Ahab's life, this is in the second chapter, in Second Kings, he doesn't appear to, the Bible doesn't say that he dies. It just describes him as ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. And his successor, Elisha, sort of runs after him and says, and greets him, says farewell to him in some sense. And then he's succeeded by Elisha.
Fire seems to be such an important part of this in the book of Kings. And it leads me back to think of Aaron's two sons who did what God said you shouldn't do. And I don't know if there's any connection, but I think of them and think how they perished.
Maybe some connection. But fire is important because Elijah becomes a kind of figure in seeing Jewish history, and at least in one way, which has sort of evolved and been in time, he becomes the figure who will indicate who the successor of King David's line is in the future. Who will be Mashiach, the anointed one, which has this, further elaborated idea of a savior of the Jewish people and of the world. But since we don't know who David's successor is, and David's legitimate successor might not even know who he is, the idea grew up that Elijah will come back to earth and presumably easily identified. He's taking the fiery chariot back, and so he's identifiable, and then he will then indicate who the Mashiach is.
Elijah in our tradition, in common stories,
What's the last thing you said after in our tradition?
in more
Oh,
In
right.
into a very nice, all the men appears, he appears in the Seder, he appears in the grace, and is kind of mysterious.
Right. Elijah reappears to the rabbis in the Talmud very, very frequently. And whenever they want, among other things, whenever they want to know what God's doing about something or how God responded to something, they'll ask Elijah. Elijah, what's going on up there. And he's like the link between heaven and earth, for the
There
rabbis.
was fire and brimstone.
Right, but he doesn't. But you said it. He doesn't appear to the rabbis that way. He appears just as a quiet person, who's available for consultation. He's just like a part of the rabbinic college.
Which I never do.
Well, I was going by what you said, which I'm agreeing with you that he appears among the rabbis. I don't know that he has appearances outside of the rabbis, except for the idea. We're getting a little bit off the subject only because it gets into legends of Eliyahu, but he was, what relates to this is that not only was he critical of Ahab, but he was also critical of the people. But that's probably because they were idolaters. So the legend is that God says to Eliyahu, because you've been so critical of the people and you question whether they're observing the covenant, I'm going to require you to be at the covenant ceremony of every Jewish boy that's born from now on into the future. And so that's the reason why he appears at every bris. And some people set a chair for Elijah. I know at Temple Bethel there's a chair of Elijah that was art piece that was made to be at a bris. And, you can find these things in museums and maybe in some people's homes. But if you don't have one of them, you can still set a chair for every object to identify, to be at the bris of every child. Then there's the other view that he's there to identify whether that we would like him to be there because we would like that child to be the Messiah. So that's another reason why he's there. But
So Elijah first appears in the book of Kings in his role, and then has
that's right.
this link between the book and the Jewish tradition. This is where Elijah is.
That's
And he
right.
just kind of comes
circuitous
Passive,
plan.
yeah, it's not, we don't write a lot about who Elijah is.
No, I
but
don't think
only-
it's passive. He's very aggressive.
He's aggressive, but all of a sudden he appears, we don't know his
Backstory.
He's just
Okay,
there.
yeah. Well, that's more or less true. And that is shall we say, the new type of prophets that we have in this book. That's right. Now, the older type was, I'm now only thinking about the ones that are given big play. So the older type was a prophet like Nathan, and he was sort of, like I always imagined that Nathan had a salary. You know, I mean, like he was there, he was in the king's house, you know, and he was paid to be a prophet. Whereas Elijah wasn't. He was more, like timid. And so he's a more of a mysterious figure, as was Elisha. And for that matter, as was Ahijah, who appointed Jeroboam. So, even though we don't know a lot about Ahijah, except I forgot to say that Ahijah, at the end of Jeroboam's reign, condemns him. He appoints Jeroboam at the beginning, then he condemns him at the end of Jeroboam's reign for his rebellion. And that theme recurs throughout. References are made back to that throughout the book of Kings, that things are going no better than they went with Jeroboam. Okay. So now we have to be concerned about the time. So let me just,
One other
okay, go ahead.
Next to the honest summary, it starts to have things like God holds, possesses, God is kind, God is good, or God is, are these kind of reference how God is referred to in the book of Kings, and are we supposed to come away that something is changing? God sees, God fires, God is revealed. This is what's going on.
Well, if I had an answer to that, it would probably be in the form of some sort of sermon or Devar Torah. I don't know. The only thing I could say is that by having the name of God, usually it's the syllable Yah, in the name, some form, Yah or Yit, in the name of the king, it probably lends some religious legitimacy to the king. It's like saying, this king is kosher. So that's the most that I would say about the
Oh, is
king.
that a translation of the king's name?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was a reference to language. Okay.
Okay? It's entirely the king's name. Now, the important thing to note before we adjourn is that there is, just to avoid any confusion at least, there is another Jeroboam, another king named Jeroboam, who becomes king. And he is, if you look on your chart, you'll see that he follows, they just give the Hebrew pronunciation, Yaravam, but they call him Yaravam Roman numeral 2. Right? So that's just to distinguish him from, they didn't use Roman numerals in this book. That's to distinguish him from the first Yaravam. That's all. They just have the same. Listen, there are some of these, similar names with Judean kings too, also. But notice how long he reigned,
Yes.
Jeroboam said. He reigned for 41 years. And he is within a dynasty. He's in the dynasty of Yehu. And so this was in some ways the height of the Israelite kingdom, was under Jeroboam II. So he was very successful as a stabilizer of the kingdom. The end of Israel, is intertwined with the ambitions of the empire of Assyria, beginning with Menachem, who was on our descriptions. Okay. So Menachem had founded a new dynasty. As you can see, either on you can see that on the table of kings and prophets. Right? Now Menachem founded a new dynasty, and at that time, there was already instability because of the power that was being asserted by Assyria. Assyria had a tremendous empire. And so this was of some concern, significant concern by Israel. In chapter 15, the Emperor Pul of Assyria received tribute from Menachem. And Menachem financed that tribute by putting a large tax upon the Israelites. So you can imagine how controversial this was. But this was his way of dealing with the Assyrian Empire. But the emperor, apparently, we're not sure about this, but from some of the verses in the book of Kings and in chapter 15, if you look specifically at verses 19 and 20, you might be able to get this. Apparently, Pul took the money and withdrew. In other words, he didn't offer any protection against the other tribes. This was a kind of a monumental protection racket where the emperor would offer protection against some of the other tribes. Then later in chapter 15, we have a new king of Assyria, much better known, Tiglath-Pileser. He comes and he captures various northern areas. And then in response to that instability, Hoshea installs himself as the next king of Israel. He turns out to be the last of the kings of Israel. In chapter 17, he becomes a vassal of yet another successive ruler of Assyria, Shalmaneser. And but this is a vacillating king, Hoshea. In chapter 17, verses 4 and 5, he betrays Shalmaneser, and then Shalmaneser invades the entire country of Israel and conquers it. All of this happens in chapter 17. What we're told in that chapter, and I'm sorry that we don't have time to read it, but you can read it. It's eloquent in a very sad way. The emperor invades the country and he shifts the populations. He brings in people from other parts of his empire into the country, and he moves Israelites out, exiles them to other parts of his empire, mixing up the populations and apparently thereby preventing the perpetuation of the identity of the country now that he has conquered. Some say that was his policy throughout all of his conquests, but this appears to be represented by the Bible, at least, as the policy on Israel. And as a result of that, we refer to the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Those are the tribes of Israel. They're lost to us in the sense that they have no continuing unique identity as Israelites. We have today, to this day, we have some people who are known as Shomronim, as Samaritans, apparently taking their name from the capital city of Israel, who may be the result of a kind of amalgam of people from non-Israelite parts of the Assyrian Empire with Israelites, and they actually have practices that are biblically based. They take the 5 books of Moses plus the book of Joshua to be their holy books, and they live currently. I'm not sure where they live, but they historically lived around the city of Shechem, of Nablus, and they follow a biblical calendar. Doesn't conform with our calendar in terms of actual dates of things, but it's their practice, and so I guess they're possibly living testimony to some of these events.
Lost tribe, that's why Kohanim and Levi, Israelites is a mush, mushing together all the.
No.